Yeah, when we
Let's talk
spoke.
about your most recent book, though.
Okay,
The
sure.
Sidewalk Cruiseship. Um, you were the Poet Laureate of Albuquerque from 2020 to 2022, which you've been referred to as Albuquerque's COVID Poet Laureate.
Mm.
And I think, I get a sense of that from this book, that a lot of what's in here was your sort of working out of that period of our lives.
Yes, it was kind of interesting because uh, I had to propose a project when someone nominated me for Poet Laureate. They sent me this whole packet that I had to complete, and one of the things was to propose a project, and my project was poets in the libraries, and so I proposed that before the pandemic became a thing, right? And so my idea was to have
Mhm.
poets who I knew go to one of the 19 libraries in Albuquerque and read, do a set of their work, and maybe I'd read a poem. And then I would have an open mic for the people in the neighborhoods around that library. So it was again my idea of democratization of art. I really like to bring in as many people as possible. So when the pandemic hit, the libraries all closed, and of course, we weren't going anywhere in public. So I had to quickly shift and figure out a way that we could continue to do the project. So what we did was the city's uh, television crew, Go TV, they call it, they came out and we had the featured poet from near the library stand out in front of the library and read, and then they recorded it. Then somebody from the library talked about what was offered at that library, which was everything from the usual things to like multi languages, books in many languages, or a seed program, and all kinds of things that they offered, genealogy, research, and things like that. And they would talk about everything that they offered there at the library. And then we had a Zoom recording of all of the neighborhood poets, and so it became this huge project with well over 100 poets participating. And ultimately, the city asked if I wanted to do an anthology, which I did. It's called One Albuquerque 100 Poets in the Libraries Anthology. So what started as basically a huge challenge ended up being a way for poets to continue to relate to each other during the pandemic, which was wonderful. But we also ended up
Hmm.
with an extensive video library of poems from the pandemic, because many of the poems were about the pandemic. Not all, but many. And so I asked for the poets to send me a poem, and I compiled this anthology, which won the New Mexico Arizona Book Award for a poetry anthology in 2023. And
Mm.
it's it contains people who were pushcart prize winners and international literary award winners like Margaret Randall, and it also had people who had never ever published a poem, hadn't even performed a poem before, because I just encouraged everyone. And
Isn't that great?
it was amazing.
Uh huh.
Like, the youngest one was a teenager, and the oldest one was in her 80s, late 80s. So it was all kinds of people, all at every level, and it's just such a delicious thing to be able to showcase all of these people, and. It was just thrilling, because then they all were part of an award winning project, which was just amazing. And I love that. I love to bring poets out of hiding. People who are sitting at home writing, but they're like Emily Dickinson. They're never going to try to publish, and just to get them out. And the one woman came to a reading that we had at a local Rodolfo Anaya library, and she she got up there and she was in her 80s and people stood up and cheered for her. And she said, I've
Mm.
published a poem before. And she texted me afterwards and said this was a thrill of my life. And her daughter was there, so it was like, really exciting for her. And
So
I love
it was a very strong emotional experience,
yeah.
which is great. And I sense from you, this is a thread in your life, obviously, between radio and putting together anthologies. That is, it's very important aspect to you to have this type of community and to really, I guess, manifest that idea that poetry, that everybody is a poet. Incidentally, I can claim that I have told stories in every library in Albuquerque
Oh,
back
well,
in the 90s. And I also interviewed Rudolfo Anaya at the time.
oh, wow.
And he, of course, called Albuquerque, which is difficult to say, but it was the old spelling of the city name before it became, I think, before it actually became American.
Yes.
And anyway, just an interesting little tidbit. He was always very welcoming to anybody who wanted to come and talk to him and interview him. And I interviewed him at the time for WBAI radio in New York, as well as Kate Horsley, who was another writer out there, and A. Carr, who was a native Navajo writer, writing mysteries and so on. So I feel some kinship there with the Albuquerque libraries because I was able to go around to each one of them and do some of the storytelling that I was doing at the time.
That,
But you went right to talking about your people projects, and I do want to talk about Sidewalk Cruiseship,
oh,
which is entirely written by Mary Oishi. And
yes.
maybe we could talk a little bit. Actually, maybe what we could do before we talk about the book is I would really love it if you could read a little bit
Sure.
from a couple poems for us, and then we could go on. I don't know if you had any picked out. I was particularly um, just really felt the one called Ghost Town.
Oh, you like that one? Okay. Um,
I really did. Maybe you could read that and read one of your choosing.
okay. Ghost Town was written during the pandemic, and it was inspired by one of my Facebook friends who posted a whole bunch of pictures of Albuquerque, and he was so depressed about it being so deserted downtown. And then it turned into basically an anti police brutality poem, but it was inspired by his Facebook post. Ghost Town. "Dis town is coming like a ghost town," was the song that kept singing in an Albuquerque adopted son's head, louder and too loud for the silence downtown as he walked deserted streets past boarded up windows. He took a few pictures, a truck turning left with no one in the crosswalk or the sidewalks either for that matter, except the son with a song in his head and one unhoused man curled up in his dirty blue blanket in an alcove, his few belongings nearby, a water bottle and a backpack in the corner near his head, already half ghost. One shop owner, windows intact, has painted on them the face of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter. Hashtag justice for George Floyd is the caption. It's more of a chant than a song, but yeah, I can see how your inside ears would sing, "This town is coming like a ghost town." Another picture on the strip, one lone lowrider, red lights in the grill. A few blocks down, a chopper, all stretched out, yellow, chrome, and attitude. Other than that, not much sign of life. Albuquerque's adopted son is feeling deep despair. I doubt he ever took the Old Town ghost tour back when things were open all the time. He wasn't a tourist. This is his home. Who needs a ghost tour? Ghosts in every neighborhood, hiding in the volcanoes, ghosts everywhere. In the university ghetto, an alcoholic found 3 days later in her back room, dead. Now she's refusing to leave, lighting all the candles, turning on the stereo at 3 a.m. She's determined to get somebody's attention. La Llorona, you'll have to ask the ones born here about her. I can tell you since I arrived, one spirit runs down Zuni looking for an unlocked car to spend the night, looking over her shoulder for that one cop who turned off his lapel camera. Friends keep building her memorials by the wall at the trailer park near where she went down before Zuni bends back to Central. They keep building over and over, but they keep being torn down until they finally give up. This ghost not on the Old Town ghost tour, too far removed, nor the ghost with the black gloves, los guantes negros, holding a shovel, wishing he had answered his daughter's calls so that no wellness turned death call had followed. Nor is the ghost on a hill near the manicured neighbors just under the mountain, the ones with the magnificent westward views. He wasn't well. He wasn't to be reasoned with. He didn't belong there. So the cops were called. This town is coming like a ghost town. Yes, it's a ghost town. Spirits that go back more than 300 years, long before this country ever breathed its name. Didn't you see that sign on your last picture? It says, "Some tears become flames." Don't despair, son. That's Albuquerque talking, and she damn well knows what she's talking about. So, that's, thank you. It wasn't on my list to read today, but I'm happy to read it.
Oh, well, thank you. I picked a long one, didn't I? But I
Yeah,
just really
that's
um, felt that strongly, the idea of the ghosts. And I, I wondered how much your background informs your view of Albuquerque. I think it's an interesting landing spot. And you talk about, or well, in your bio, it talks about growing up with a father who's part of a white supremacist type um, thinking, I guess
yeah.
I'll say.
It was
And
my
I
father.
get this
Father
sense
was.
of,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that was breaking up. Can you try again? Go
Uh-huh.
ahead.
My father was raised
What did you say
Mennonite,
about your father?
my father was raised in the Mennonite church, Mennonite, which is similar,
Hmm.
it's in central Pennsylvania. And he ran away from home and joined the military and therefore was excommunicated because they're a peace church, or they were at that time anyway. And he married my mother, who's Japanese, during the occupation after the war. And when he moved back to Pennsylvania, um, he was kind of ostracized a little bit because he was excommunicated, although they tried to get him to come back to the church. And then there was another brother who had married an Appalachian holiness woman whose parents met at a KKK rally. And she couldn't have any children, so she really wanted a baby. So she managed somehow to get me away from my parents when they moved back to California, because my mother really hated central Pennsylvania, which I can understand. It was the Bible Belt, and they valued was really hard work and subservience to the Bible and to men and all of that, So my mother wasn't into
Right.
it. Anyway, so I ended up growing up with this woman who, both she and my uncle who raised me were had an eighth grade education. So it was it was really not an easy way to grow up. You know, some people say you sign a contract, or you kind of you agree to who where the circumstance of your life in advance. And I always say, well, I should
Mhm.
lawyer look over mine first. But anyway, I see.
I do get that sense. I get the sense when I read the poetry of that type of, um, I'm not going to say alienation, but this sense that you're looking and you're seeing the ironies and the contradictions that are presented in situations. That's what comes through strongly to me. Where in this poem that you just read, you talk about ghosts, and then we see ghosts in a different way because we're in a ghost town, but the ghosts were already there. And
Mhm.
I think that's what you point out in various ways in this book. And uh, well, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a while in my early adulthood, I was pretty bitter at how I was raised. But at this from this vantage, I can see what things it did for me. It carved out some real empathy for other people who are marginalized, because being marginalized as half Japanese,
Hmm.
going to school in a sundown town where black people weren't allowed to spend the night. So I was the least white, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
person in the school. So I got a lot of harassment almost daily. And, you know, I went home to a mother, this Appalachian woman. I would go home to her and she would say, well, Jesus won't let you have more than you can bear. And I used to think, well, he's really pushing it. But anyway, you know, I think that having that experience gave me a real passion for human rights. We didn't have a television
Hmm.
because that was the devil's box, but he did subscribe to Life magazine from some traveling salesman. And so I got to read about the civil rights movement when I was a little girl. And I used to think, well, they don't know
Hmm.
the Japanese girl exists, but they're fighting for me. And to this day, when I hear a speech by Dr. King, I start to cry, you know, and Pacifica Archive.
Because you read about him in Life magazine.
Yeah. And I thought he was just, I thought the whole movement was just such a beautiful thing. You know, because I got called.
That brings to mind, it brings to mind for me our current situation with banning books. Um, I sorry to interrupt. I just was thinking how important that was for you at the time to be able to look at those Life magazines.
Mhm.
And maybe you could. I've been asking all of our guests, and it's something that we talk about on the Listen and Be Heard Hour for readers and writers. I don't know if you're aware of what might or might not be going on with banning books in Albuquerque, in the libraries, in the schools, because here in the South, it's really um, a big issue. And we've actually had high schoolers contact us wanting to remain anonymous, complaining about the situation in their high school because they're very concerned about books being just snatched off the shelves. And when I think about how important that was for you, I think we can say the same about a lot of things that are in the libraries and the schools now for children who are victims of different types of circumstances. And it's their life, truly their lifeline.
Yeah, it's the banning of books. It's also the push to go toward vouchers and put children in religious schools or homeschool. And not
Mm,
all homeschooling is wrong or anything, but I look back and think, thank God that wasn't available when I was growing up. Because public school, as
mhm.
flawed as it was, it saved my life. And I, you know, because I got to read, like, I was a tomboy, like big time tomboy when I was a kid. And the people around me always bought me dolls, even though I didn't want any dolls. I wanted one of those little fire trucks that you could pedal, and ride around in. That was more like my speed. But anyway, there was a book in the library called Tomboy Teacher, and it was how this tomboy teacher,
Mm.
ostracized, and then one day a child fell down a well, and because of her athleticism she could rescue the child from the well. And I loved that book because it was a whole different perspective on who I was. It was like showing the benefits of being a tomboy. And so, there was a lot of exposure like that was seemed like an innocent book to these very conservative people, but to me it was like a lifeline, just like the Life magazine. So, I mean, I think they're trying to block all the exits to critical thinking and to validation of anything other than their idea of what an ideal person is, which is basically a Bible believing
Mm.
Republican, uh, male dominated, all of that, straight, everything, everything that they think is moral. And 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 they're trying to block any exits for anyone who's trapped in that. And I've been watching some of the Amish and
That's
Mennonite.
it, isn't it? It's really a bully type thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was thinking, April is National Poetry Month, but also in Mississippi, it's Confederate Heritage Month, and I'm just like, what?
Oh,
What? I
I
mean, this
didn't
is,
know that.
yes, and it's like we have never ever dealt with that period of our history, really. Like everyone
We
says,
have
oh,
not, and I often think, like in Germany, it's illegal to fly a Nazi flag, use those symbols, and yet here, um, I don't know, they lost the war. And I have respect for people's heritage, but that's a tricky, kind of a tricky word there when we talk about its relationship to human rights, I guess I would say.
right. Well, in Germany, the younger people are kind of angry at the older people. At least that's my sense, that from people who've been there and came back with that report, that some of them don't even speak to their grandparents, or at least they didn't. I mean, the ones who
Mm.
were alive during the Nazi period and participated in that. And that's because of the way they dealt with it afterwards. Here we re-assimilated them with no consequences. We named army bases after them. We did, we didn't, it's
Hmm.
calling the January 6 rioters, hostages now, the ones who've been convicted. It's like we everything was okay because this country, I think, at its core has a lot of, it's white supremacist, at its core. And so they kind of, well, let the white brothers back in, even though they killed a whole bunch of people, during the Civil War. It's like,
Mm.
we didn't make them, we didn't talk about what was really at the crux of the whole thing, and they're still
They
trying.
weren't held accountable. Right,
Exactly, exactly.
right.
And so otherwise the young people wouldn't be flying Confederate flags off their pickup trucks. But anyway, I have another poem. We
That's
have a
pretty bold. Yes, I
Yeah,
would love to hear another poem.
we have a large contingent of Native Americans in Albuquerque and in New Mexico in general, and
Yes.
that's one of the things that I think is a blessing of this place, that we didn't completely wipe out the native population. So they're still here to offer their wisdom and perspective. And so this is about one of those people. It's called Prophecy. A Dene poet, mother, multimedia artist told me today that according to the indigenous calendar, we're about to leave what she calls hell cycles, enter the cycle she and her people call heaven, when the Pleiades is directly overhead. It will get worse before it gets better, but by 2038, the mixed people, and look at us, we're all mixed, the mixed people will take us back to living with the earth again. So says the prophecy, she said, smiling down at her boy. So says the prophecy, rebeats my weary heart, weary of the cycles of pandemic hell, of conspiracy hell, of mass shootings hell, of history erasing hell, hell after hell. But so says the prophecy. So says the prophecy carries me like a refrain, glowing, warming my winter heart, waiting for the mixed grandchild who will bring heaven to earth for me this year, no matter where the Pleiades appears on the night of her birth. Perhaps she will help take us back. Perhaps by 2038, she and all the mixed peoples of earth will usher in the heaven cycles. At least, so says the prophecy. Who am I to disbelieve?
Hmm. That's beautiful. That's something to rally behind believing it. I think we are mostly mixed people. You
That gives
know,
me a lot
mixed
of hope.
people are the majority, aren't they?
Yes, and I like to hold on to hope. I never like to end with despair. I think we owe it to our children and grandchildren and future generations to hold on to hope. I think of all those people who were, for example, enslaved, and how many generations they went through that. I mean, it was hundreds of years. And so it's
Mm,
like, and how they held on to hope. They had to, or they would not have survived. They held on to hope. And I think that that's what we need to do as well. It's easy to despair because things, the
it
bullies
is.
have really grabbed power. And so it's critical
Well, I
that
think
we
as
hold
I
on.
get older, yes, and as I get older, I'm more able to, I think about the future generation in the sense of how that's um, like as hope for myself when I look at the things I'm trying to do now and like the land and how I'm trying to restore the land that I'm living on.
Mhm.
And I realize, the things I'm doing now, they will have an effect after this. They'll still be rolling along after I'm gone. And I can think about the next generations as many Native Americans talk about the seven next generations. And there is hope in that. There's a comforting feeling, and I can imagine that people, enslaved people, might have taken some comfort in that and found some strength in just thinking about that we are all one and that somehow we do live on into the next generation.
Yeah, I think taking the long view is not something that we are conditioned to do. I think we're conditioned to think about uh, the next payday or the profit and loss statement at the end of the month or the quarterly reports, things like that, or the next election. We're not really oriented toward the seven generation view of the native peoples of this land. And I think that there's so many cultures where ancestors are very important, and I think we kind of cut ourselves off from our ancestors when we came here from other places, and we kind of I think it's hard for us to think of ourselves that we are going to become ancestors ourselves. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
so we have to draw strength from our ancestors, because without their perseverance we wouldn't be here today. And we also have to take the responsibility that we are becoming ancestors. At some point we will all.
So maybe.
you know?
Right. So maybe when we cut ourselves off from our ancestors, we also cut ourselves off from those future generations because we're not able to see that type of continuum, right?
Yeah, it's
I
the root.
wanted to ask you though,
Go ahead.
right? There's the roots and there's the leaves on the trees and there's the fruit that
That-
falls from the tree and regenerates and so on and so forth, right? I wanted to ask you a little about craft. We're running out of time, but
Oh
you
dear.
used both Japanese tonkas as well,
Yes.
like the style of a Japanese tonka, as well as I don't know if you would describe the form of the others in another particular way, but I wonder if you could tell us a little what is a Tonka exactly and why you made the choice to start each section of your book with a Tonka.
Yeah, the tanka is an ancient Japanese form that predates haiku. And it's not Zen like haiku. It's it was used actually to like from lovers would the next day they would give each other a tanka to kind of reflect on the beauty of what their experience was the night before. And so it was kind of like love poems and lyrics basically. So
Mm,
they were longer than a haiku. It's like 57577 is more like the, although that's not, it's not an absolute rule, but they didn't, it wasn't like inhabiting a moment like a haiku is, where you're just bringing someone in a
right,
very zen moment. It's more, it's has a lot, it's a lot more narrative than that. So the first haiku or tanka rather that I wrote was in the aftermath of Janice Mirikitani's death. She was the poet laureate of San Francisco, and the couple, part of the couple who was in Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco that feeds all the hungry and all of that.
hmm,
And anyway, she was a
right,
fabulous
right.
poet, and I knew her well. She endorsed one of my books, and I interviewed her and things. So anyway, we developed a friendship. But when she died, I didn't know that she was even ill, and she never revealed that to me, even though we had been in two different programs together. And then I asked her about using one of her poems in a Taos Writers Conference workshop and everything, and she wrote to me 4 days before she died. And at the end of the email, she said, "I love you." And I thought, that's really odd. She never said that. And then she died. So I
Mm,
wrote this tanka. It just came pouring out of me. Leaves not meant to fall before the autumn dries them, drains them of their green. Were you always golden then, to have left without a word? And that was my first tanka. And then from then on, I just started writing a bunch.
mm,
That's, they used 11 of my tanka for the kind of the sections of the book. So.
right. Could we get one more poem from you? But well, what about that choice though? Like, how do you feel? Like, when would you decide to write like a Tonka as opposed to some other form of poetry?
Well, I like really brief poems. I like haiku and tanka because I like to see how distilled I can make an emotion. How few words. As
Mm-hmm.
a minimalist. But then I also went to the Pilgrim Holiness Church all my growing up, so I also like poems that are almost like narrative, almost like hypnotic, build on themselves kind of thing. So it's kind of those two voices, I guess. Um, so I don't know. I could I end with something humorous?
Sure, please do.
Okay. I swear plenty, but I won't drop the F bomb in my poem just to shock the stereotype of Asian women out of you. Anyway, so
That
thank
was that was brief and funny. And I so appreciate your joining us here today at WLBH.org,
It was
and being so willing to experiment with me as I'm fumble around here. Well, I won't say I was fumbling, I was experimenting. I'm going to take a positive approach to this. I was experimenting with both doing a squadcast recording and live streaming at the same time. So I hope it went well for our listeners who were listening to the live stream. And I would just like to tell you and everyone that it will also be available in an edited version for episode 16 of the Listen and Be Heard Hour for Readers and Writers, which is a podcast and also goes out to the Pacifica affiliate network, including WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina. So, my name is Martha Senator, and I've been speaking with Mary Oishi, author of Sidewalk Cruiseship. Oishi, author. How can people, is there a way for people to follow?
they can become my friend on Facebook, and my last name is OIS like Sam HI. And I have an author page on Amazon.
When are you
And I'm
on the radio?
I'm not anymore. I retired from that. I'm actually having I have some I need to I'm going to be fitted with hearing aids next month because I'm losing my hearing. So
Oh,
that's
I'm
why
sorry to
I
hear
kept
that.
asking you what at the beginning because yeah, I,
I didn't actually notice. So, I mean, we worked it out, and I'm glad we were able to communicate. And you said that the book is available at Amazon. I know it's also available because I found it that way at UNM Press
yes,
online, and that is the publisher, University of New Mexico Press, of
yeah, and I think you
Sidewalk
can
Cruise
order
Ship
it through
by
your
Mary
local.
Oishi.
I think you can order it through your local bookstore, which is my preferred way. But
I-
yeah,
I'm sure you can, and that's always a good thing for people to support their local bookstore. They usually can order anything that's in distribution already, and it's a good way to make sure your local bookstore stays open, right?
yes,
Thank you so much for joining us today, Mary Oishi, and
thank.
please stay in touch with us here at the Audio Garden.
I will. Thank you.